Welcome back to Zarila HOA Stories. Today's story is one you'll definitely want to hear till the end. Drop your city or country name in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's watching from. So here's what happened. I live in a quiet, neatly maintained neighborhood. I've always taken pride in keeping my house looking good. Fresh paint, trimmed hedges, and a driveway that I'd just spent an entire weekend repairing. After years of cracks and weather damage, I finally decided to seal and resurface it myself. It looked brand new, smooth, and better than ever. But just a few days later, I came home to a bright yellow envelope taped to my front door. My heart sank the moment I saw the HOA logo. The letter inside said I was being fined $500 for unauthorized alterations to community property appearance. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. The driveway was mine, after all. But when I called the HOA office, the manager coolly told me, "Your new driveway coating is too dark. It doesn't match the community's approved color palette." I was speechless. Too dark? It was asphalt gray, the same color it had always been, just cleaner and sealed. I explained that I had used standard driveway sealant from the local hardware store, but they didn't care. They said if I didn't restore it to its previous appearance within 14 days, the fines would double. That's when frustration turned into disbelief. I had followed every rule, paid every HOA fee, and attended community cleanups. And yet, here they were, punishing me for maintaining my own property. I walked around the neighborhood later that evening and noticed something interesting. There were at least 3 other driveways darker than mine. None of those homeowners had been fined. It felt personal. The next day, I went to the HOA office in person to clear things up. Inside, the president and 2 board members sat behind a long table, acting like judges in a courtroom. I calmly explained the situation and even showed them photos of other driveways with the same color. But instead of listening, the president smirked and said, "We have standards here. Maybe next time you should ask before you change something." Her tone wasn't just strict, it was condescending. I left that meeting feeling humiliated but also angry. I couldn't believe people who were supposed to make the neighborhood better were using their power to bully homeowners over nonsense. That night, I started digging through the HOA handbook, highlighting every vague and unfair rule. And the more I read, the more I realized how much control they really had, and how many people they'd already pushed around. That $500 fine wasn't just a warning. It was a challenge, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. After that ridiculous fine, I tried to convince myself it was a one-off, a bureaucratic mix-up that would be corrected once the HOA realized how petty they were being. But the paperwork kept arriving, each letter more officious than the last. 2 days after the driveway notice, a bright orange violation tag appeared on my front gate. Apparently, my trash cans had been visible from the curb for too long after pickup. That carried another $100 fee. I stood there staring at the tag, incredulous. I started to pay attention. Little things I'd never thought about became rules to them. The exact angle of my porch light, where my welcome mat sat, the percent of my lawn that counted as acceptable turf. Each complaint was written in the same dry, formal tone, signed off by the same board members who seemed to take a private delight in making life difficult. At first, I kept my cool. I fixed what I could, trimmed a patch of grass, moved a plant pot, repainted a mailbox. Neighbors began confiding in me. Mrs. Alvarez, who'd lived on the block for 30 years, told me about being fined for leaving holiday lights up a single day too long. The Johnsons were threatened over a child's birthday banner. The Smiths had been lectured about their teenage son's loud car stereo and how it could lower property values. Each story felt like another example of petty enforcement. One evening, fed up, I attended an HOA meeting. The community room smelled faintly of coffee. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. The board sat on a raised dais, as if presiding over a courtroom. When it was my turn to speak, I laid out the timeline. The driveway sealant, photos of other driveways, the fines. I tried to be calm and reasonable. I asked for clarity. Was there a specific approved color list? What was the appeals process? Instead of answers, I got condescension. The HOA president, Evelyn, cut me off with a practiced sigh. "We have standards," she said. "If you don't like them, you're free to move." It was designed to silence debate. I left burning, not only angry, but realizing this wasn't about good governance. It was about control. So I dug deeper. I spent nights combing public records, developer disclosures, and the bylaws. The bylaws granted broad discretion, but left gaps. Crucially, the HOA didn't own the street or sidewalks. Those belonged to the developer's trust, a separate entity that I discovered was quietly selling property rights. That nugget of information changed everything. I talked to title companies and a real estate attorney who explained how rights to streets and easements could be bought or transferred. If street rights were sold, the balance of power could shift. I also noticed how many people were too scared or tired to fight. Challenging an HOA takes time, money, and energy, three things many families don't have. When I knocked on doors and shared what I'd found, people listened. Some were skeptical, others relieved. Small conversations became a loose alliance. We compared letters and cataloged incidents. I started mapping transfer timelines and learned to read parcel records. There were windows when rights were up for sale and clauses requiring homeowner notice before certain transfers. That meant leverage. If you knew where to look, opportunities appeared in the fine print. The alliance grew. A neighbor volunteered to organize violation letters. Another compiled photos. A retired paralegal summarized bylaws into plain language. These small acts turned private frustration into collective evidence. People who had been isolated by fear now felt supported enough to speak. I balanced legal consultations with quiet organizing. An attorney outlined steps for bidding on rights or challenging transfers and warned about pitfalls. We planned carefully. Any action would need to be legally sound and backed by evidence. It would be slow and meticulous, but effective. Preparing the strategy became its own kind of resistance. While the HOA polished its image in newsletters, we did the tedious, effective work behind the scenes. I saved what I could, drafted letters asserting homeowners' rights, and arranged meetings with title officials. Each small victory, an answered call, a copied deed, a neighbor willing to testify, felt like progress. When the shape of the plan came into focus, it wasn't theatrical. It was legal, patient, and stubborn. We wouldn't take anything by force. We would reclaim what records and rules allowed. And when the time came, the board would find that their authority, wielded as a weapon against neighbors, could be quietly neutralized with paperwork, testimony, and a little financial leverage. They'd use the letterhead to make people feel small. I was going to use the same systems to make things right. I wasn't driven by spite. I wanted balance. Every step I took was meant to protect neighbors from arbitrary power and restore dignity to everyday life. The next moves would be careful and deliberate, but I could feel the momentum. For the first time since that yellow envelope, I felt hopeful instead of helpless. Once I realized the HOA didn't actually own the street, everything clicked. Their control depended on appearances, authority without ownership, and I was about to use that weakness against them. For weeks, I gathered information. Late nights at my computer turned into hours spent reading property documents, county registries, and financial records. It turned out the development company that built our neighborhood decades ago had transferred management to the HOA, but never gave them full ownership of the roads or sidewalks. Instead, those areas were held in a property trust, one that was now quietly looking to liquidate assets. I made a few discreet calls. Most people I spoke to thought I was just another curious homeowner. But one call changed everything. A local property agent confirmed the trust was, in fact, selling its remaining rights, including the streets and access easements that the HOA depended on. The price wasn't outrageous, but it wasn't small either. Still, compared to what the HOA had cost me in stress and unfair fines, it felt worth every penny. Before making any move, I double-checked everything with my lawyer. We reviewed the HOA bylaws line by line, making sure nothing could stop a private party from acquiring those rights. There was no clause that gave them first refusal. Legally, they couldn't block the sale. The only thing standing in my way was timing and money. I didn't want to involve my neighbors just yet. The fewer people who knew, the smoother this would go. I refinanced part of my mortgage, pulled from savings, and finalized the paperwork. Within a few weeks, the deal was done. On paper, the HOA still acted like they ruled the community, but behind the scenes, the title had shifted. I now own the street itself, the land beneath their feet. The first time I drove down that road after the deal closed, I couldn't help smiling. The same asphalt they once fined me for ruining community appearance now legally belonged to me. Every mailbox, every lamppost, every inch of pavement was part of the property I had just purchased. I didn't announce it right away. Instead, I waited. I wanted them to find out in the most fitting way possible. And it didn't take long. A month later, I received another fine from the HOA, this time claiming that the reflective surface of my driveway sealant was creating unapproved glare. I actually laughed when I read it. They hadn't changed. That's when I decided to make my move. My lawyer drafted a letter addressed to the HOA board. It was short, formal, and polite. It stated that, effective immediately, their association was now operating on private property owned by me. Any use of the street, driveways, or sidewalks under that parcel would now require a maintenance and access agreement, a legal formality that came with a small annual administrative fee. When the board received it, chaos erupted. Evelyn, the president, called an emergency meeting. I didn't attend, but neighbors told me later that she was practically shouting. They had no idea how it was possible. They've been enforcing rules on property they didn't even own. The next day, I got a knock at my door. It was Evelyn herself, clutching the letter. Her usual smug expression was gone. "What is this supposed to mean?" she demanded. I kept calm and explained that I had legally acquired the street rights. The HOA could continue functioning as usual. Nothing needed to change, as long as they respected the new ownership terms. She looked stunned. "You can't do this," she said. I smiled. "Actually, I already did." A week later, the HOA's attorney confirmed that everything was legitimate. Their legal reach stopped at property lines, and the roads weren't theirs. If they wanted to host meetings, enforce community patrols, or even maintain the entry gate, they'd now have to coordinate through me. Word spread quickly. Neighbors started coming by, some curious, others quietly thrilled. For years, people have been fined, threatened, or harassed over petty rules. Now, for once, the power dynamic had flipped. I wasn't out to punish anyone. I just wanted fairness. I drafted new community guidelines, simple ones. No more fines over paint shades, garden ornaments, or driveways. No more intimidation. Homeowners could express themselves as long as their choices were safe and reasonable. I even waived the first year's access fees, just to show this wasn't about profit. It was about principle. As for the HOA board, they held one final, very awkward meeting. Evelyn announced she was taking time off to deal with personal matters. Within months, the board dissolved and restructured with new members, people who actually listened to homeowners instead of policing them. Standing in my driveway one evening, watching the sunset reflect off the same surface they once called too dark, I couldn't help but laugh. All their threats, their arrogance, their endless fines, and now they had to drive on my street every single day. It wasn't revenge in the loud, dramatic way movies show it. It was quiet, calculated justice. I hadn't yelled, broken rules, or stooped to their level. I'd simply learned the system better than they did, and beat them at their own game. And that's when I realized something powerful. Sometimes the best way to fight unfair control isn't with anger. It's with information. When the HOA's attorney confirmed that I legally owned the street, the entire board went silent for a few days. It was the first time they didn't send an immediate letter or warning. Usually, if you so much as left your car parked at the curb overnight, there'd be a notice on your door by morning. But now, nothing. Just silence. That silence spoke louder than any fine they had ever issued. It was the sound of realization that their control was built on assumptions, and those assumptions had just been shattered. Within a week, the board called for what they labeled an urgent homeowners assembly. Flyers appeared on everyone's doors and email inboxes, filled with alarmist wording about property ownership confusion and potential threats to community stability. I went, of course. I wanted to see how they'd handle it. The meeting took place in the same hall where they'd once humiliated me months earlier. This time, though, the mood was very different. People were whispering, curious, even excited. Everyone had heard the rumors. The street, the sidewalks, the HOA's power slipping. Evelyn, the HOA president, sat at the front table looking pale and nervous. Her confident smirk was gone. She opened the meeting by saying, "We have recently discovered that the ownership of the main roadway in our community has changed hands without HOA consultation. This situation could create serious challenges for neighborhood management." I raised my hand. "I believe you're referring to me," I said calmly. Heads turned. Some neighbors smiled, others gasped. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. "Yes, Mr. Daniels," she said, trying to sound composed. "Would you care to explain what you've done?" I stood. "Sure," I said. "I bought it. Legally. Every inch of the street the HOA has been enforcing rules on, I now own. I have no intention of disrupting the community, but I will not tolerate unfair fines or bullying anymore. Not against me, not against anyone here." The room erupted. A wave of murmurs, a few laughs, even applause from the back. Evelyn tried to regain control, tapping her pen on the table. "That's not how things work," she snapped. "The HOA governs this neighborhood." "With respect," I replied, "you manage the community. You don't own it. There's a difference." And maybe it's time everyone here remembered that. From that moment, the entire tone of the room shifted. For the first time, the homeowners weren't scared. They started speaking up, calmly but confidently. Mrs. Alvarez mentioned her holiday light fine. The Parkers talked about their flower pots. The Smiths brought up their kids' bikes. It turned into a long list of frustrations that had built up over years. Evelyn tried to interrupt, but it was useless. The people had found their voice again. When the meeting ended, I walked out to the parking lot surrounded by neighbors thanking me. One man clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You did what we all dreamed of doing." I just smiled and said, "Sometimes you fight rules by learning them better than the people who wrote them." Over the next few weeks, the board's tone changed dramatically. The threats and fines stopped. They began sending polite emails asking to coordinate community maintenance with a new property holder. I approved everything that kept the neighborhood clean and safe: road repairs, landscaping, streetlights, but under one condition: no more harassment or unnecessary fines. Every rule they wanted to enforce had to be transparent and approved by homeowners, not just the board. At first, they resisted. Old habits die hard. But when they realized they had no leverage, when they literally had to request permission from me to host meetings or repaint the curbs, they finally backed down. Evelyn resigned 2 months later, citing personal reasons. But everyone knew the truth. The system she'd built on intimidation had collapsed. The new board that replaced her was smaller, kinder, and actually interested in listening to people. They even invited me to join as an advisor. I politely declined. "I don't want power," I said. "I just want fairness." The biggest change came from the neighbors themselves. For the first time in years, people started decorating their yards again. Kids rode bikes freely without parents worrying about fines. Someone even painted their front door bright yellow, a color the old HOA had banned, and instead of getting a violation notice, they got compliments. The neighborhood began to feel alive again. A few months later, local news picked up the story. It didn't mention names, but the headline was unforgettable. "Homeowner outsmarts HOA, buys street to stop years of harassment." The article described how an overly strict association was forced to reform after a resident legally acquired property rights. The story went viral online. People loved the idea of standing up against unfair control without breaking the law. I received hundreds of messages from strangers who'd seen the story. Some shared their own experiences with controlling HOAs. Others just wanted to say thank you for proving that regular people could make a difference. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. A few former board members tried to stir things up, claiming I'd exploited a loophole. But the county records were clear. I had purchased the property legally and paid every required tax and fee. My lawyer even joked, "They can't fine you for your own road." As time passed, life returned to normal, but better. The tension that once hung over the neighborhood was gone. People started organizing events again: block parties, garage sales, even a summer fair. There was laughter, color, and connection, things the old HOA had quietly squeezed out in the name of order. One evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset reflect off that same driveway that started it all. The surface still had that deep gray tone, the one they'd called too dark. Now it shimmered in the light, smooth and perfect. I smiled, remembering the letter that had kicked off the entire battle. That $500 fine was still framed in my office, a reminder of how a single act of unfairness can spark something much bigger. Sometimes I still think about Evelyn. I don't hate her. She wasn't evil, just convinced that power meant control. But control, without respect, always collapses eventually. I hope she learned something from all of it. I know I did. I learned that standing up doesn't always mean shouting or fighting. Sometimes it means reading, researching, and being patient. Because power built on arrogance can't survive against calm, informed persistence. Months later, I received a formal request from the new HOA board asking to renew their access agreement. This time, it wasn't hostile or defensive. It was respectful. They offered to include homeowners in every major decision, to hold open meetings, and to ensure fines were replaced by warnings and mediation first. I agreed immediately. That's all I ever wanted, fairness and respect both ways. The neighborhood is thriving now. Property values have gone up, but more importantly, so has community spirit. The same street that once symbolized division now represents unity. Every now and then, I get new homeowners stopping by, saying they heard the story and wanted to see the famous driveway or the street that beat the HOA. I laugh, show them around, and tell them the truth. It wasn't about beating anyone. It was about reminding people that rules exist to serve the community, not to control it. The last time I drove down that road, I slowed near the entrance, looking at the polished metal HOA sign that still stood there. Underneath it, someone had added a small wooden plaque, hand-carved and simple. It read, "Respect works both ways." I didn't know who put it there, but I smiled every time I saw it. It summed up everything that had happened, and everything that changed. That's the story of how a single unfair fine turned into a fight for fairness, and how knowledge, patience, and a little courage turned the tables on a system that thought it couldn't be challenged. This is Zarila HOA Stories. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and follow for more tales of real power, real justice, and real people standing up for what's right. And for the full version, come over to my YouTube channel, Z, because here, every story reminds us, even when the system feels too strong, the smartest move isn't always louder, it's just wiser.